The committee, or the Center for the Study of World Religions, which is across the street here, is really delighted to be able to help sponsor this event and welcome Michael Gibbons here. This event really is a result of the inspiration and efforts of Kimberly Patton. Professor Patton is Professor of Comparative and Historical Study of Religion here at the Harvard Divinity School. She specializes in ancient Greek religion and archaeology and has research interests in archaic sanctuaries and in the iconography of sacrifice. She also teaches in the history of world religions and cross-cultural religious phenomenology, ritual studies, the mythology of natural elements, religious art and iconoclasm, the interpretation of dreams, animals in religion and myth, ritual weeping, material holiness, and funerary cults. So she has very, very wide interests. Professor Patton is the author of several books: The Sea Can Wash Away All Evils, Modern Marine Pollution and the Ancient Carthitic Ocean, and the forthcoming Religion of the Gods, Ritual Paradox and Reflexivity. She's co-authored and been a contributing author to 3 other books: A Magic Still Dwells, Comparative Religion in the Postmodern Age, Holy Tears, Weeping in the Religious Imagination, and A Communion of Subjects, Animals in Religion, Science, and Ethics. So thank you, Kimberly, for arranging this event, and we look forward to your introduction.
Thank you, and I want to say a special word of thanks to Dean William Graham and to Professor Swearer for the co-sponsorship of this lecture by the Dean's Office and by the Center for the Study of World Religion. We're very grateful. In the spring of 2006, exhausted by various ordeals, both external and internal, I sought a very short leave of absence from my entire life and fled to southwest Ireland. There, in Killarney and the Dingle Peninsula, I took part in a seminar in the religious history and geography of Ireland. Our group had the great good fortune to take to the field with one of the foremost archaeologists in the country, Michael Gibbons, and to encounter the sacred landscape and religious monuments of this part of the world with someone who knows it so well. I'm delighted and honored to be able to introduce him to the Harvard Divinity School community and to the wider communities and other friends who have joined us tonight. Welcome. He comes to us today from Washington, D.C., where he delivered a lecture on Friday at the Smithsonian on the controversial preservation issues relating to the cultural heritage of the monastic islands Skellig Michael and Small Skellig off the coast of County Kerry. Michael Gibbons is an archaeologist with 25 years of experience in the field. He's also an independent scholar, an expert on prehistoric Irish material cultures, including Celtic, Viking era, and early Christian Irish monastic history. He's a member of the Institute of Archaeologists of Ireland, the Archaeology Committee of the Heritage Council. He's worked with the Department of Antiquities in Jerusalem and for the Museum of London City Excavation Program. In Ireland, he worked on the Donegal Archaeological Survey and Galway Archaeological Survey. And he's former co-director of the National Sites and Monuments Record Office. He's responsible for carrying out a preliminary archaeological survey of counties Kildare, Carlow, Kilkenny, Waterford, Sligo, Leitrim, Roscommon, and Mayo, as well as developing Ireland's first remote sensing section within an archaeological office specializing in analyzing vertical aerial photography. His numerous publications include most recently a book, Connemara, Visions of Yarchonacht, as well as numerous articles in Irish archaeological and historical journals on, among other things, dyeing in the Mesolithic, that's D-Y-E-I-N-G, although he knows about the other kind of dyeing as well, the Longfort phenomenon in early Christian and Viking Age Ireland, Dunmore, Fortress No More. These are some of the titles of his recent articles. A Hiberno Norse ringed pin from Ome Fechin and Connemara, its historical and cultural setting. Mapping the Mesolithic in Western Connacht. A reassessment of a proposed Viking fortress. And Croagh Patrick, Ireland's Holy Mountain. Now, I want to add that what makes Michael Gibbons so unusual among archaeologists is his intense interest in cultic continuities, in the living traditions that persist in Ireland, particularly in pilgrimage sites such as holy wells, stone boats, stone circles, and sacred mountains. And this interest in living traditions he shares with my cherished mentor and teacher, who was able to join us tonight, David Gordon Mitten, a classical scholar and excavator at Sardis. When archaeological excavations implicate features of the landscape or monuments that are still venerated by the Irish people, Michael insists not only on making the connection in his academic presentation of these sites, but also advocating publicly for the preservation of modern traditions of veneration. His is what Cycladic archaeologist Colin Renfrew has called cognitive archaeology, a method that, while respecting the foreignness of the past, nevertheless attempts, insofar as it is possible, to reconstruct lost worlds of thought. Michael's work reveals how human beings responded to an animated landscape, how they thought and continue to think about their environment and act towards it. In Ireland, this landscape is itself alive with powers with whom its people have always been in vital relationship. I'm delighted that Michael is able to be with us this evening to share with us his many years of research on the archaeology and ethnography of one of Ireland's most famous pilgrimage sites, Croagh, St. Patrick's Mountain in Connemara, and his lectures entitled Even on Their Knees, Climbing the Holy Mountain of Croagh and the Pilgrimage Tradition in Irish Christianity. Michael.
I'm delighted to be here this evening. Great honour for me to present some of the work I'm involved in, together with a small research committee that was formed almost 20 years ago now, when Croagh, the steep peak of Patrick, was under threat from gold mining. And a small community got together to try and defend its heritage. The real goal on this mountain, of course, was its living pilgrimage tradition. And we saw off that threat. Our patron is the Archbishop of Tuam, Michael Neary, who we'll see, or you may have seen him on the poster. But my involvement in Croagh and in pilgrimage goes back to my childhood. I grew up in a traditional house, Republican, Catholic, one which respected the ancient, while had in a very modern world also. My father lived abroad all his life. So I grew up in a household which had an outsider's view of the Irish landscape, and was brought on pilgrimage as a young child. As a 5-year-old, I remember getting the head beaten off me when I returned from St. Pauline's Well with my pockets laden with loot which I had taken from the saint's bed. I had wondered why all the pilgrims were firing in their money onto these little rounds, these penitential beds, and I was relieving St. Colin of some of his ill-gotten gains. And much to the consternation of my mother, who realised this when I came home, as we counted out our money, John Keneally and I. And that was a vivid introduction to pilgrimage and the various taboos associated with them. One is not supposed to rob from your saints. Anyway, as I progressed, I was responsible for mapping much of the uplands and islands of the Irish west coast. And Croagh is one of these great upland landscapes. It's a centrepiece of a sort of magical religious landscape that stretches for about 50 miles and takes in its arc and in its orbit a whole array of Irish history. So it's like a ritual canvas, starting at Ballintubber in the east and ending on a monastic island, Carr Island. But before I get onto the mountain itself, I will trace the background of the beginnings of early Irish Christianity in Ireland, because it is an important background. And Patrick, of course, our most famous founder figure, wasn't Irish at all. He was captured on a slave raid as the Irish, in a brief imperialist burst, invaded and crossed the Irish Sea and colonised our neighbouring island of Britain. The mountain itself, however, is a wonderful landscape. It dominates the place physically and spiritually. It's visible from half the country, virtually. On the very summit, you have a mountaintop monastery, and all along on its sides and flanks, you have a rich array of prehistoric, Bronze Age, Iron Age, early Christian and medieval monuments. So it's a rich tapestry. It's right at the edge, the very western edge of Europe, overlooking the ocean. And Ireland itself was right and beyond the Roman frontier, right out here. This is the Romans' wall, the Roman at its zenith, right up, well not quite at its zenith. Antonine Wall is up a little bit further. Our Antonine Wall here. The Romans pushed right up here into eastern Scotland. But Ireland itself, the country of Ireland, the island of Ireland, was beyond the Roman frontier. We have earlier accounts where Ireland first gets mentioned, these early classical accounts. And this is one, Hiernea, to the west of the island of Britain. Ptolemy's map is the first detailed record we have of tribal groupings living and inhabiting various parts of Ireland. And there's great controversy over whether we can trace the modern tribal entities throughout Ireland with some of these particular tribal entities here. The Brigantes down here in the very southwest shared people with Western Britain, for example. The shape and the plot, however, is pretty accurate, in contrast to the medieval maps that comes 1,000 years later. Various accounts, in the accounts of the Roman accounts of the Irish, are quite fascinating. And this is where you get the first and long-lasting prejudicial accounts of the Irish by urban-based societies. And you can go through them all. It's one catalogue of disaster, barbarous, wild Irish savages, fairly unfriendly, warlike people who smear the blood of slain enemies on their faces and do not distinguish between right and wrong. Soil carried from Hibernia drives out bees from foreign honeycombs. Now this is a theme that comes right through writing to modern folklore also. Stormy sea passage from Britain, navigable only a few days a year. The Irish crop up throughout the Roman accounts. They crop up generally, again, in a not a very attractive way. Cannibals in Gaul, this is very interesting. Who as a young man he saw them, who ate buttocks and nipples of shepherds and wives as delicacies. The Scoti and the Atticoti, as if followers of Plato or Cato, have no individual wives but indulge themselves sexually like beasts. They knew not Moses or the prophets. Now this is a recent critique of his work. Very stupid and has breath heavy with Scoti porridge. Critic is a canine agent of Satan with lineage of Scoti near Britain. So this is the first use of the stupid Irish. So it goes right back here. And of course this is an urban-based view of the world. And the Irish, in the essence, are a rural, tribal-based society. People from the towns and town dwellers are seen as, they're antagonistic generally to them. The Irish from very beginnings are fairly xenophobic, like they don't like foreigners. The Scoti chased in ships. The end of the Roman period, of course, you have Britain is overrun by various barbarian peoples from the east, the Germans, from the Germanic peoples, from the north, the Picts, and the west and the north, the Scoti. And this is Gildas here, early 6th century, describing the end of the world, literally the end of his world, the end of classical civilization, great towns and architecture, roads and organized societies. And part of that end was the barbarian conspiracy in the late 4th century, and then later with the abandonment of Roman Britain, the Irish moving in from the west. And it's in this dynamic that Christianity emerges in Ireland, from contact between Ireland and the late Roman, collapsing Roman Empire. So the great paradox, of course, is the Irish take to Christianity at a time when it's been abandoned throughout northwestern Europe, for reasons we're still not very clear about. Late Roman frontier, this is Hadrian's Wall in northwestern England here, a whole line of heavily fortified coastline here, almost certainly because of raiding across the Irish Sea. And this is the area we think Patrick is from. Patrick, captured on a raid, escaped, is carried off to Ireland, spends years as a slave boy, and escapes only to return years later as the Irish are calling him back. And he becomes the great metaphor for Christianization of Ireland. But there's a whole lot of other characters, Secundius, Auxilius, not a lot of them, but a number of them, which are probably pre-patrician. Patrick sort of gobbles up all the hard work of these early pioneers, Christian pioneers. And there's probably several avenues of Christianity in Ireland. We have Roman loot. The Romans didn't come to Ireland, but there's substantial amounts of Roman material from various places in Ireland. So in late Roman times, 4th, 5th century, you can see Ireland as a place where it's partially Romanized. Areas to the east and south in contact, regular contact with Gaul and Roman Britain. you have contact with it, and so society is getting partially Romanized. However, they're not overawed by Roman Britain, by the Roman culture and the Latin culture. And we know this because they invented their own written script, an Ogham inscription. This is a fairly unique event in the whole late Roman world, and it speaks of a self-confident society, confident enough to develop this particular written form of Irish. This is an Ogham stone. There are many of these stones. They're found throughout Munster and the very south of Ireland, scattering up through East Connacht into Ulster, but not many, and then right into southwest Scotland and onwards into northeast and right out onto the Shetland Islands, where there's a dozen Ogham. So you have migrations into Western Britain in the late Roman period. The Romans of course, have all sorts of strategies to deal with people at the edge of the frontier. You buy them off. You invite groups in, and the Irish may have been brought into Britain in an unofficial way as federati people to keep even wilder Irish out. So you have to sort of various zones of contact. And this is the sort of accepted image of Ireland here, and this is Gaeldom, conceded that bits of Western Britain are actually Gaelic in the 4th and 5th century, the Dál Riada. But however, the Ogham inscriptions tell a different story, and linguistic evidence from Cornwall and Wales and right up is strongly suggestive of a much wider Gaelic presence throughout the whole of Western and Northern Britain. However, the Scoti abroad in Britain are neglected in Ireland and misunderstood in Britain. They have no historiography, or they have no champion in, like, the Picts, for example. But it's from this contact of barbarian or Irish migration in this very convoluted and complex period between the 4th and 5th century that we have Christianization coming to Ireland. The earliest dated Irish inscription we have, ironically, is from a Roman town, Silchester, halfway between London and, say, Bristol here. And it's an Ogham stone found on excavations in the last century, but recently redated, re-excavated. It's reads Tebicatus. Now, that's probably a British name, but the Ogham and some of the names are in British, ancestral to Welsh. But stone was stood on the outside of a Roman villa on the veranda, so it's aimed at an audience who is familiar with this language. So perhaps an Irish suburb in Roman Britain, quite possible. Roman cities were very cosmopolitan. Or else it's an Irish warband recently arrived on one of these raids that Gildas complains about. The Ogham and the early Irish distribution is fascinating. It stretches. This is the description of Ogham inscriptions down here in the southwest. Hugely concentrated in Kerry, Munster, but right in, it's the same distribution into southwestern Britain, in Wales in this case, down into Cornwall, North Wales, and Catherine Forsyth's work, which has shown that the Ogham in Scotland is not some obscure language, unintelligible, illegible, or Norse, or Basque, or any other combination of languages. It's in fact, when she read it as early Irish, it was legible as Irish, through up the north, east of Scotland, and right out into the Northern Isles. So indicating Irish, the use of Gaelic, far more widespread, and so Gaeldom extending way to the north. So the written form of Irish may have evolved in this society, in the Irish colonies, if you like, in Western Britain. And Christianity is coming across from probably this context, both through raiding, the traditional image of it, but also through tribal contacts and elite groups living on both sides of the Irish Sea. So Patrick is this great founder figure. Of course, Tirer an Shanachas, according to the traditional lore of Ireland, the reason patrician sites are so popular in Ireland, or one of the reasons, is that on Judgment Day, Patrick alone will judge the Irish. This was part of the negotiating process that took place at the beginnings of Christianity in Ireland. So Finbar doesn't have quite the same power, but a patrician site, climbing a site associated with Patrick, wherever they are, have strong brownie points associated with it. So the traditional date, 432. Palladius, we know from Roman accounts, was in 431. So Patrick is sort of a floating figure in terms of date and time, but sometimes in the 5th century, maybe late 4th, as early as that, some people have suggested. And from the archaeological and paleobotanical evidence, we know from virtually zero information from the second, second century AD in Ireland, by the 3rd and 4th century, there's a population expansion rapidly throughout Ireland. It's one of these periods in Irish history where you'll see population growth, forests being cleared, settlement everywhere, every corrig, every rock, every hillside. There's burgeoning populations right across. So the Irish expansion into Roman Britain seems to be quite explosive. And this is something we see with other peoples at the same time, around the edges of the empire, explosive populations impacting on it. The settlement patterns, of course, are rural. There's no major towns, there's no major villages at this period. So out of the Iron Age, we end up this wonderful suite of monuments. So we have a wonderful set of stage props to look at when you look at early Irish landscapes, one of the richest landscapes in Europe. Part of that richness is because of a traditional belief in the She and the spirit world in Ireland. So this belief in fairies and Sheogi of all sorts and hues provides a protective mantle draped across the landscape, which means that we have this wonderful survival of monuments from the very earliest period. So the early sites here is a classic secular site, probably a lordly residence here, a fairy fort or a Sheon fairy mound. This is a Tri-Valor Rath. But in this little field here, townland just south of Galway City, 3 of them on the ridgetop here. Another large, and these would be the large farming residents. So this is the sort of lordly residence of the rural Irish elite from the 6th to the 9th century. We also have other settlement types in terms of early Ireland, so it's a very different geography from parts of Europe. Very similar, however, to those in Scotland and parts of Western Britain. Lots of lake dwellings. Ireland has lots of lakes, thousands, and we have about 3,000 of these. There's a stone-built cashler fort with a canoe dock here. And these monuments are in use in Ireland right down to the 17th century. So the pilgrimage tradition in Ireland sort of flows back and forth between those who argue it's got a long and ancient history going right back to the Neolithic, and those who say that the modern pilgrimage tradition is just that. It's a post-Reformation phenomenon, and a lot of it is a concoction and reinvention. And so those are the two points of argument and discussion over a long tradition steeped in the Mesolithic and Neolithic and so on, and then a more recent interpretation. So continuity against disruption, if you like, and that's part of the wider debate that's going on. The sites, of course, this is Dún Dúchar, the Black Fort on the cliff-bound west coast of Ireland. So we have this incredible array of sites that are from 100 acres down to half acres. Tribal society with 100 different kingdoms. And aspects, and these are the early accounts, the Roman accounts refer to these, where you have barbarous rites. The strangers are commenting on the Irish being different, awkward, and practicing all sorts of practices that to their own eyes look like savagery and pagan in many cases. Royal inauguration here, famously referred to by Gerald of Wales, and again he's commenting on this in a derogatory fashion. This isn't complimentary to the Irish, but it's and these are images from that period. And he's talking about kingship. There was a northern and furthest part of Ulster in Kennel-Connell, that's modern-day Donegal. A certain people accustomed to consecrate its king with a rite altogether outlandish, abominable, when the whole people of that land has been gathered together in one place. A white mare is brought forward into the middle of the assembly. He is to be inaugurated not as a chief but as a beast, not as a king but as an outlaw. Embrace the animal before all, professing himself to be a beast also. The mare is then killed immediately, cut into pieces and boiled in water. A bath is prepared for the man afterwards in the same water. He sits in the bath surrounded by all his people, and he and they eat of the meat and of the mare, which is brought to them. He quaffs and drinks of the broth, which is in it he is bathed. At Doon Rock, next to Kilmacrennan in Donegal, you have a great inauguration site. So we had the secular inauguration rite, and then they went on to the early church site where they were re-inaugurated in a Christian fashion. So we have this sort of tradition. The absorption, it is argued, of earlier Iron Age traditions surviving in a landscape where you had no royal authority or very decentralized authority, and the early church elders having to incorporate lock, stock and barrel chunks of the earlier society. Up to the 16th century, Elizabethan accounts of Ireland again highlight the oddity, the strangeness, the differences of the society. Again, this is from Donegal. Ulster gets a lot of mention because Ulster was the most Gaelic area and was the subject of a series of wars, the 9 Years' War, which are very well documented cartographically and pictographically, like this one here. And again, this is a world. The bard is down here, bard here, musicians here. This is a summer boolie, so it's under summer camp. These characters are called bragators, for example, rectal musicians, professional farters. You also would have had a satirist here, a whole range of people composing a satire against somebody. It was something that was feared. It was something that it was part of your ammunition. So injected into Ireland in the 4th or 5th century, you had this extraordinary new religion which had took fast and rapid root. So the Christian message was one attractive to a society, and we're not sure exactly, probably simpler. It released its social forces, or it hit further down the social order perhaps than the pre-Christian pagan religion. In any case, it was very rapid, it seems, and its diffusion was widespread. But in the diffusion, earlier elements incorporated. The monasteries are both large and small, with thousands of them quite literally. And in the West, where I spent a lot of my time working, you have a sort of survival of the evidence because of the abandonment early on. But this is in the East Coast, a very famous site at Nendrum in County Down. A circular enclosure, a round tower, medieval church. Outside another enclosure, and outside that another one again. Excavated by Leonard in the 20s when evidence of a monastic school was found. Another monastic school was found very recently on Inishmarnock Island, just off the Scottish coast. And this is an illustration of that school, because we found the actual, and we didn't find it, but Catherine Forsyth, graduate of here. This is from her article within that recent publication. And here in the monastic school you had both Ogham and Latin being taught up until the 7th and 8th century. So it was part of your scholastic learning. You had scholastic Ogham in use. So this is quite an extraordinary site. So these are the slate tablets that survive from this monastic school. Dominating, of course, some of the larger of these monasteries, you have these cloch tours, these round towers, which in themselves were pilgrimage centres, where you could do a penitential round in and on and up through the stairwell right up to the summit. So these towers dominate some of the larger Irish monasteries. They're late from the 10th century onwards. The monasteries were the intellectual centrepiece of early Christian Ireland. Great wealth flowed into them. They were patronised by the chiefs, and they were highly prized. And particular saints have huge attachments to certain families. As a minor family, like the O'Briens, as you grow powerful and militarily powerful, you had to be associated with a powerful saint. If you didn't and hadn't had a powerful saint, then you paid a scribe a small fortune to concoct a story in order to show how mighty your particular saint was. So these scribes were paid, and they robbed liberally from the life of Saint Colleen, from the life of Bridget, from the life of Columkill, Patrick, and so on. So having a good saint's life was part of your intellectual and political armoury. You were nobody without a good saint's life. So these were a rich world. This world, of course, was raiding by the elite was a part of this. So raiding by the Irish, an elected elite at that. So it's a very different world than the medieval Europe. And of course in the 7th or in the 8th, 9th century this world was assaulted by the Scandinavians from the north. But all across the landscape you have major monasteries, remoter sites in the most extraordinary places. This is Doon Briste on Downpatrick Head off the northwest, North Mayo coast. A sea stack 100 metres tall with some medieval buildings on it. They remain unsurveyed because the survey team's survey plans were blown into the Atlantic during when the helicopter returned, so it's still unsurveyed. The Fulmers here were using it as a landing stage, while the disconsolate archaeologists were looking down saying, what happened to our work? So Doon Briste is one of a whole series of island monasteries associated with early monasticism, stretching from Skellig Michael in the south all the way up into the Shetland Islands. Aran the Nave, Aran of the Saints, became a major pilgrimage destination in its own right. This slab of rock are 3 islands with about 15 island monasteries scattered across it. The soil of Aran was considered sacred. Then much smaller sites. Again, you have the circularity, the large clochán or beehive cell, rectangular churches, and outside it a guest house or pilgrim's house. This is a drawing of Kelly by one of the early excavations down at Begganish Island in the southwest. Ordailon, here associated with St. Fehim. So as you move across Ireland, about every 20 miles you're into a new political entity. And the only people who could cross these boundaries are the Nemid or the sacred classes or the high clergy. Monasteries are organised in around federations of monasteries under founder saints. So St. Fehim is associated with this monastery and a whole slew of them right across the centre of Ireland. The next island north in Ishbofin is associated with St. Coleman, Iona, Durrow. Whole other geography, if you like. Again, a monastic site here, remote, cliff-bound island, D-shaped enclosure with a central church, a yacht or altar, clochans beside the river, a horizontal mill site here. So some of these sites become pilgrimage sites that survived through and still survive into the modern era. Off the west coast in the 15th century, or area of the 13th and 14th century, you have a series of Admiralty maps marking some of the more important island monasteries, like here, the Aran Islands here and here. Hy-Brasil, the spectral isle, a floating island on every single medieval map. It was so often recounted by sailors and merchants that it wasn't a map unless you had it, and it moves in time and space up and down the west coast. No wonder we lost so many Armada wrecks as they sailed around this coastline in the 16th century. Definitely not quite up to the speed of Ptolemy's maps at earlier period. The earliest references to pilgrimage we have, of course, pilgrimage don't get mentioned specifically very often until something exceptional happens on them. But we do have references to Clonmacnoise, a very famous pilgrimage site, and then from the 10th century onwards, more numerous references to them. Hainis MacNichol, for example, a very famous account here. His sin was grave. He killed his own son, a stiff sentence. He was required to do public penance at no fewer than 15 different pilgrimage sites in Ireland, ranging from Armagh to Skellig. And they add the combined distance of all these journeys ended up with the distance to Rome. So from an early period, you have pilgrims going to Rome. You've got them going to St. Catherine's Monastery in the early 8th century. In the 12th century, you have pilgrim here. This is a 12th or 13th century, scallop shell with a piece of burnished bone, probably as a relic here. So pilgrims are going from Ireland to the south and to the east, and also Ireland is attracting pilgrims from abroad, from medieval Europe, particularly to Lough Derg. And they're coming to Monahincha, a famous German account in the 16th century. Ilon the Mo, island of youth. And this is fascinating, a German who lists on that he isn't a papist bigot like everyone else in Ireland, as he describes us. But again, these early accounts are quite fascinating because he's coming here in the winter of 1580. And so you have some of the modern pilgrimage traditions, you can trace them back through the medieval pilgrimages and right back. I'll just flick through some of these. Yes, instead of probably robbing me, they did not know where Germany was, and only having heard of Spain, England, and Flanders, so I could tell them the journey home would take me more than a year. So he goes on to account this one. Even if I'd slept with the Holy Virgin, all my sins would now be forgiven. And the reason for that, he arrived in one of the most appalling years of the 16th century. Snow and ice on the ground. And they marvelled at this character, how from a land afar that they'd never heard of. What is interesting of his account, he's describing pilgrim as alive but not terribly vibrant at the time. But this is a time of English conquest, major dislocation in the Midlands of Ireland. So I thanked him and also asked his forgiveness for having, as much as my conscience allowed me, joined into their superstitious behaviour. For some reason we returned by some other vicious, swampy way. Dank and dangerous is the sort of caricature that you have of these accounts. We stayed overnight with some noblemen. He was travelling, he'd hoped to go to St. Patrick's Purgatory, but he turned back at this point. He was only halfway there. He had enough to do. However, Patrick's Purgatory continues on, and you have in the 16th century renewed interest in pilgrimage. Counter-Reformation, renewed interest in it. And the interest is often now focused around holy wells, specifically. This is Tubercalline down here. This is in the windswept, tiny little wells, often just a spring out of a rock. There's Macduach, Macdara, and Calling, three brothers, and often there's no actual, it's oral history accounts we're relying on. Much of our written history was destroyed during the Civil War, so the oral history accounts of Ireland are hugely important, though often neglected by archaeologists and historians. This is Tubercalline. It's almost certainly a prehistoric tomb, reused, with a holy well down in the centre of it here. Further down you have Liach Naman, the rock of the woman. And here from underneath the soil is still carted away from beneath the soil, and it's used in foundations, it's used to protect crops, and it's a blessed soil, blessed by St. Columkill himself. I worked in this valley for several months, and on leaving the valley I was given soil from this Liach, or beneath this rock, to put into the foundations of our house. And that was the most precious gift that I could have been given from a man who did the traditional journey around the night pilgrimage around Thoris Columkilla. So the pilgrimage journey is something, and a tradition is something that's alive, it's rural, misunderstood very often, and not studied in great detail up until very recently. Because it was very alive and vibrant and rural by ordinary people doing this extraordinary journey. The fact that it actually was a living pilgrimage tradition hindered its study in some ways, rather than added to it. Many sites have overlays. This is a typical early Christian site in the 12th century. You had reform of our churches, abandonment wholesale of monasteries, diocesan structure being established, and so our monasteries end up in often the smaller ones are just a circular enclosure, kink in the field boundary, and this is now a children's burial ground. So they have a secondary function here. Children who died without baptism under Catholic canon law are forbidden to be buried in consecrated ground. So where do they end up? On abandoned early church sites. Some of these early church sites were formerly part of a pilgrimage round. Many of them are lined with white quartz pebbles as symbols of innocence or hope. This is a site associated with shadowy saint called Saint Skellig. And there's a whole saint's life, incredible saint's life. The saints' lives, however, have to be taken with a bit of caution. They're a bit like, they're being described as the science fiction of the Irish Middle Ages. So they're wonderful accounts, and in themselves they're insightful, but they're not terribly reliable. Well, what would you make of a site like this? This is quite close to where I live. So we have holy trees in Ireland, we have holy wells, we have sacred mountains, and we have stone boats that are still venerated. This is Baude Columkill, St. Columkill's boat. Now, Daphne Potion-Mould is a wonderful scholar. She's in her 80s now. And she took this photograph in the 1950s. And this boat is still venerated locally. And these are pilgrims coming to it. And invariably these boats are opposite a holy island. In this case, opposite Aaron and Niamh, Aaron of the Saints. And on the other shore, conveniently, you have a similar boat, except this time it's Baude Columkilla on the opposite shore. Occasionally the boats are linked by subsea saints' roads. So you have this mythical landscape associated with pilgrimage also. Anyway, men are taking stones off it as a relic. One of the most famous of the pilgrimage sites, which we have a living tradition associated with it, or had up until very recently, is Inishmurray Island. Inishmurray, a monastic castle or fort with an incredible array of monuments from medieval churches, 1 and 2. At Chachmalash, a shrine chapel from the 9th century here. Beehive cells or clohans, and this structure here is a Clocha Braca, or the speckled stones, but known as the cursing stones. Now, much of medieval Ireland is beyond sort of medieval world and the medieval mindset, if you like. This is 1580s. It's a British Admiralty chart off the northwest coast of Ireland. And it's marking out 3 Spanish ships cast away, for example, 3 Spanish Armada ships recently found. But here on this little island, Inishmurray, it says, on this island dwelt a holy man by the name of Scanlan, of whom the country people hold a superstitious opinion, that if he do turn and be angry with any one of them, they will turn the 5 speckled stones upon them, which he kept there for that use, and they shall die within the year. Now, the use of cursing stones and cursing rituals and liturgical cursing was very common in the early church. And it was common right up into the Middle Ages in Ireland. And you went around, there was a particular rite you associated with it. Then from the Middle Ages onwards, it passed out of fashion and then passed into the oral culture, if you like. And so, Cailleach an Tlochán was a famous woman where I lived. And she was, Cailleach an Tlochán translates as, Cailleach is a wise woman, Cailleach, the wise woman of Clifton, or the witch, a mistranslation. And she had the power of the curse and the cure. So cursing stone was something that was used and suppressed in Ireland in the late 19th century with the growth of modern Catholicism. So you have it in the church in the 10th and 11th, 12th century. You have it on Inishmurray Island, which was a very famous pilgrimage island. And you have it in the modern Ireland, or up until 19th, early 20th century Ireland. This is the cursing stone, and of course, the cursing stones are 15 beautifully decorated with beautiful early crosses, rounded beach pebbles, built on top of this leach. These have recently been excavated, not this particular one, but these are outdoor shrines or outdoor altars, and they date back from around the 9th or 10th century, where you had a whole circumambulation of the island with a whole series of shrines culminating in the leach. And the leach may have been the saint's founder tomb, if you like. So the leach becomes, and the saint's tomb becomes almost equivalent of the ark itself. So this is Inishmurray Island. So you have these island monasteries scattered up and down the west coast. And on island, a famous island at Lough Derg, this is a very important map of it. It's done in the early 16th century, just before it was destroyed during the conquest of Ulster, following the 9 Years' War and the Ulster-Scottish settlement and conquest of Ulster. And this site was largely destroyed at that stage, but reinvented later. But you have the rounds, the circular enclosures, penitential cairns down there, and you have purgatory itself here. Rebuilt. The Augustinians moved the whole monastery, because this was where you had a vision of hell, and this was the great attraction of Lough Derg. You fasted for 15 days, and you went into it, and you were locked in, and you had these harrowing scenes would confront you. With a few sceptical Dutch visitors, however, says that they were seeing the visions of hell and damnation because they had starved on their journey through Ulster. Such was this difficult terrain and territory you get to. They weren't buying this at all as a religious experience. But these accounts are quite fascinating. So this is Lough Derg before its destruction, but of course today it's still a major pilgrimage destination. These are 19th century photographs of it. And at Moulmein, further down in the Connemara Mountains, you have this series of upland mountain shrines. Moulmein, this is Liaba Foric in here. This is the bed of Patrick. And Patrick on this site, as in many other sites, is doing battle in the oral history with Crumdhu. Crumdhu is a crooked, dark one associated with high places all over Ireland. So Moulmein, some of these sites, of course, in 19th century Ireland, Catholicism had been banned in the Middle Ages and was reintroduced, if you like, in the early 19th century. So a lot of, during the period of its banning for 2 centuries, the vernacular religion survived around cults, around particular holy wells and holy shrines. So it never died out. But pilgrimage itself was frowned on by the civil authorities because it's often associated with what was seen as antisocial behaviour, heavy drinking, carousing, matchmaking, and invariably faction fighting. And this is a wonderful Bartlett account, and we have a number of accounts of Moulmein, a patrician site in the mountains here, just south of Crowpatrick. Liaba Foric up here. They're down along the penitential beds putting in offerings. people coming from both sides of the mountains. And many of these sites, of course, are on boundary lines. They're between tribal territories. Having a site associated with an important saint and a pilgrimage destination gives you high stature. So it gives that community strength, if you like. But they're often then centres of great friction, because friction is building up throughout the year in these communities. And often it boils over on the day or the days around the pilgrimage, because often there's fasting followed by very heavy drinking. And so when my grandfather was going to Moulmein, for example, and this was in the 1880s and 90s before he immigrated to America, the men going to Moulmein were given the worst clothes in the house. Now, they wouldn't have had much clothes to begin with, because these were very poor, impoverished places, but they were in case there'd be a row. And these would be very severe rows. These would be, in the corner just down here, you have a faction fight breaking out. And this is an amazing account of it. A religious ceremony by this. Seated in the grass, stones which lie abundantly there, some old person on their knees beside the holy well, performing their devotions. Some boastful expression of a Joyce, and this is in Joyce country, Dúcha Hioya, so it's right on the boundary between Connemara or Flaherty land and another people's country on the other side. 3 glasses of puchin were quickly gobbled, the boys and innkeeper. And generally the women, they are breaking off rocks, piling up ammunition, and they're firing, let them fly. Of course, in the late 19th century, Catholicism in its formal power and glory is reintroduced into this area by a class of clergy who are coming from merchant class and middle class backgrounds, and this world is completely alien to them. It's Gaelic speaking, it's Gaelic culture, it's a survival of a different world and culture. So they try and banish it and suppress these, try and sort of cut out the antisocial aspects of pilgrimage, if you like. So you get a lot of suppression of these sites, sometimes for good reason. There's a lot of violence tied in with them. Somebody said to me, you seem to be repeating all these sort of anti-Irish prejudicial comments that you would get in Punch magazine. And, is that really fair? Well, the answer to that is that Irish people will go to the pub, drink too much, and fight over whether these actual accounts are actually describing real Irish people. So that's my answer to that. 5 or 6 were disabled, but there was no homicide. Well, that's something. Some women who had been opposed to each other shook hands and kissed and appeared as good fights. So there's a whole release of energy in people. And this is, climbing Croagh as I did as a child, this is what you get. This is the Connemara coast. Mother was born just there. And off the coast you have St. Macthara's Island. This is a miraculous island also, associated with Macthara, the son of the oak. Son of the oak in Irish tradition is a fox or a wolf. So on Macthara's day you don't go fishing. Sails are always dipped passing it. So, and the well from Macthara's holy well is used in the bow of the boat. They use it in the bow of the boat because the holy water is their life-saving equipment. It's the training they never did. It keeps them between here and eternity. So the people have tremendous affection, and this water has powerful curative properties, particularly this particular water associated with St. Macthara. Again, we have here Malachius Chelius. Keelys, these could have been an ancestor of my own, Archbishop of Tuam, caused to be buried underground for special weighty reasons. You have a similar thing here, and this was probably a wooden statue, which they were used on the Inishkay Islands, for example, to calm the seas in the late 18th century. And Macthara's Island, that pilgrimage continues now on the 16th of July. Moulmein is on the first Sunday in August. Croagh is on the last Sunday in August. These dates are orbiting around Law Lunasa, the 1st of August, Lu being the ancient pre-Christian Celtic deity, and the August in Irish is Law Lunasa. So people have argued that their origins are in harvest festivals of pre-Christian date. This is another yacht or outdoor shrine or altar. These are from the 1940s, a wonderful set of photographs. and the tiny little oratory here, a skeuomorph stone of a timber church. So much of this architecture is actually replacing earlier timber buildings. And there's a whole architecture of pilgrimage around these islands, ending up in the centre, either at the yacht altar or in the ruined church itself. So pilgrims are continuing here. So you have a series of national pilgrimages like Croagh, and then a series of smaller ones, local ones. This is again at the same church, now restored or partially restored, and mass, and hundreds of people now. Actually, more pilgrims here. This is one of the extraordinary things about pilgrimages in Ireland, is that as Catholicism has weakened and waned quite dramatically in the last 30 years, pilgrimage and attendance at pilgrimage has not. So this outdoor journeying to a holy mountain or island, sort of is reaching deeper aspects of the Irish rural life, and so it's persisted. And it's continuing. It's not fading. It's reaching a new audience, if you like. To the southwest, the most famous of the island pilgrimage was here. And this pilgrimage still continues, not quite in the same way as the others, but it never died out. This is Skellig Michael, again abandoned in the 12th century. Main monastery over here, later one, a remoter one, perched on this tiny eyrie here. This is 700 feet above the sea. Dedicated to St. Michael now, but almost certainly associated with St. Fionnán, the great saint of the Croagh, the people of Croagh, which is a tribal group from the Western Peninsulas. Lent was delayed on the island, so you have a great, again, tradition of late pilgrimage here. This is post-Reformation. Catholicism is banned, but pilgrimage tradition in remoter areas is continuing uninterrupted. And again, you have this same courting, dancing, drinking, and other various amusements. And the Skellig lists are, this was, you didn't want, if you were from a respectable family, you certainly didn't want to end up on a Skellig list. And a friend of mine has collected some of these again very recently. The pilgrimage brought you up a series of winding staircases into the main monastery here, and there was offerings, and we have accounts right through the 18th and 19th century being left in this oratory here, and onwards and upwards. This is this year, taken in July of this year. Mass being said in one of the smaller oratories on the site. And it's got this incredible suite of monuments from, some of them dating from the 10th century. So you have, in the 10th century, so the whole of this society architecturally coming together, if you like, and there's an incredible array of them on this island, with a central yacht here, or saint's tomb, with the oratory overlaying it, and clochans around it. And then further up, as if you weren't, that wasn't arduous enough, series of little cells on this precipitous cliffs, and then again onwards onto the summit, where you walked out and haven't done a rock climb to get here. And these are pilgrims are doing this, not rock climbers. Out onto the end here, where there was a stone, a decorated early Christian slab, and that was literally your pinnacle, and that was where the pilgrimage tradition, that was its aim, to get out onto the slab. You're looking across onto here. So this is one of a series of mountaintop pilgrimages, 12 miles outshore, the most sort of spectacular of them. And then you have the whole other array of mountaintop pilgrimages. We have in Ireland about, these are the main ones. Again, these aren't, some of them are very well known, but others aren't. Slieve Donard on top of a 3,000-foot mountain. 2 prehistoric tombs were used, one as a cell, a monk's cell, and the other as a chapel. Slieve League associated with Éamak Bricna, shadowy saint, but a whole penitential early monastery and an island monastery attached to it. Croagh is here, Mount Brandon, Croagh, Drung and Skellig down here, and Church Mountain over here at the entrance to Glendalough and the Wicklow Mountains. Now, mountaintop shrines or pilgrimages, the argument is that this is a survival of a pre-Christian pilgrimage tradition, because throughout the Irish landscape, and Ireland is a bowl surrounded, ringed with mountains, you have your orbit and your landscape, your horizon is always in view of Neolithic and Bronze Age tombs and ritual monuments crowning the summit peaks. So we have 70 mountain tops with Neolithic tombs, as are here. These are half the size of this room. And this one in the Dingle Mountains, on the Skull, a Bronze Age or Neolithic tomb with an avenue of standing stones running for 400 metres onto the ridge. And these are visible, highly public, visible from miles away. So the argument is that the pilgrimage and the association with various Crumdu and Lu and other shadowy figures, that this is evidence of a continuing Christian, or just an overlay of Christian culture on top of this earlier traditional pilgrimage route. This is Croagh, Patrick, a tradition of Patrick being here, spending 40 days and nights here. And this is a tradition fairly widespread across the country. There are other sites associated with him. Banishing the devils and demons from Ireland. The route up is Torthorfork. The journey to the summit is along this ancient Saints' Road that brings you from the centre of Ireland right across the landscape. And as you get closer, this mountain top pyramid is sort of drawing you in. So it's a very powerful physical presence. Big quartzite dome. The base of it and around it, you have this constellation of sites orientated on the mountain. This is a Bronze Age row from around 1500 BC. And that is directed at this notch here on the eastern edge of the ridge of Croagh, where the sun sets on the 21st of December. So it's a winter solstice site. And we have a number of these sites in the area around Croagh. These are white quartz row. Again, the sun will set here at about 1:30 on the 21st of December, coming up shortly. So you have this tradition in the landscape here. And so right around, I'll just go back one there for a second. Sorry. Oh no, sorry, I missed it. There's a major rock art site on this route also. Patrick's association comes from, we have Patrick's letter to Croagh, primary sources. But it's biographers that are later, and you've got the later tradition of Patrick building as the cult of Patrick has grown powerful and it's been pushed by Armagh right around the country. Tír Chonn, the most important biographer here. Patrick was instructed to go to God to the wood of Fochlocht, which is in North Mayo, we think. While there he climbed a mountain. Tír Chonn recounts that Patrick was greeted on the mountain by the souls of unborn saints who welcomed him. Behu Porrick, the life of Patrick. Fasts on the summit for Lent. He is tormented by demonic birds, which he drives off. So Patrick banished the snakes. He's seen in the oral history as being in competition with Crumdu, the shadowy demonic figure associated with high places. And invariably he wins these battles and encounters. On the side of Croagh, the most dangerous route up is this side here. It's Lug na Jowl, the hollow of the devil. The last person killed on Croagh fell into Lug na Jowl here. She was a traveller woman, Irish tinker, who had vowed to climb the mountain 3 times the one day because her niece was ill. And some parts of the Irish pilgrimage tradition are fascinating, and there are some custodians of it. And the traveller community in general are one of those strongest custodians of pilgrimage in general, but to Patrick and this site in particular. She fell on her 3rd summit and was killed in Lug na Jowl. On one side of it, right beneath that cone, we found this hermit's cell, associated with Baba the Rika, famous Pilgrim's Guide. And there's an extraordinary account of climbing Croagh by an American visitor, Asenet Nicholson, in 1845, describing climbing the mountain by proxy, how the children in the neighbourhood would climb for portly Catholic gentlemen who spent their time drinking in various inns and hostilities. And she attempted, a girl tried to hire a girl, but she couldn't afford the price, so she climbed this mountain anyway. But she leaves this wonderful account of climbing it. The school inspectors are recounting how the declining standards in the national school system in the district of Murrisk is because all the children are doing the pilgrimage by proxy. We have a tax on the pilgrimage, and of course this is happening. Irish society is highly tribal. The Vikings are blamed for all attacks on Irish monasteries, but of course 2/3 of all raids on Irish monasteries are done by the Irish, raiding each other's monasteries. And this is a way of hitting hard, particularly a site associated with Patrick. This is sort of hitting you in the guts. The O'Briens plundered the mountain during an expedition against Rory O'Connor, and these are the two big, powerful lords of early medieval Ireland. 1113, lightning killed 30 pilgrims fasting on the summit. So there was a night pilgrimage. That ended in 1973. And again, this is mentioned because they were killed. So you only get it mentioned when there's like a raid on it or something dreadful is happening to it. But throughout the medieval period, you have references to it. In the centuries after the Reformation, the tradition continued here into the post-Reformation period. And in the west of Ireland, while much of Ireland you have ethnically cleansed, mass expulsions, dislocation of the Gaelic order, in the west, where you had a lot of Anglo-Norman families, a hybrid culture, while they were publicly loyal and Protestant, those who survived, often they were privately Catholic and rebellious. And this also applies to the pilgrimage tradition that survived through all these trials of the 17th century conquest. 95% of the land of Ireland changed hands in that century. And 600,000 people died during wars in the 17th century. So a huge dislocation of society and culture. But the pilgrimage tradition came through that dislocation. On Petty's map, Petty is William Petty, a famous map maker. He's here mapping the lands of the Papists and disloyal Protestants. And that's his sort of mission statement. But Croagh is alive and kicking at this stage in 1660. And the Porrick is coming along, ending on this island, Cahar na Niamh, the Fort of the Saints, a monastic island 12 miles offshore west of Croagh. Tiny little church site here. And on the 15th of August there's a pilgrimage out. So the larger pilgrimage now is broken up into smaller ones, not necessarily continuous. And the Mass has been said here in the middle of the early monastic enclosure around the loch, decorated with some beautiful early crosses. And that's Croagh in the background there. And again, on this island, they're arriving by Croagh, and these are an old traditional boat still used here. And the island is owned, and there's a whole series of, you do a pilgrimage right across the island from the Holy Well to the monastic site of various stops, penitential stations along the way. Here people are gathering above the cliffs to collect the holy water, which they will need for their dangerous journey back by Croagh. In the church itself, you have a beautiful hanging lamp from the 8th century, sitting on a 10th century altar. And the tradition is that the reason it's never been taken is because the seas will rise up against you. You will be fired back onto the island, and there's a strong belief in this. Of course, people interested in museums go bananas when they see these artifacts just sitting on these altars. So don't tell anyone from the museum that it's out there. And of course, the museum archaeologists love to grab everything. As one man said to me, Michael, I'm telling you where this stone is, a beautiful stone at a holy well, decorated stone, he says, but you have to promise you're not going to tell anyone else where it is. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, Michael, you archaeologists will take things in case other people will take them. And he said, it's all the same to me who takes it, but I don't want you to take it. So on these pilgrimage sites, we have some of these early artifacts still there. Croagh is here, is right down on the midway along the west coast. It's here. Cahar Island is actually this little island here. So from here, Croagh and Ballintubber is over about here. You've got this pilgrimage journey. This is Father Fahy on his pilgrimage to Croagh. He's already walked 12 miles. On the way there, you go past this Croagh na Monastic. Croagh, the hill of the monks, and it's a large monastic, now abandoned site, within which there's a children's burial ground. And if you lift up this stone, and this is what you're faced with. It's a figure with an Oran's figure on it. But the stone itself is a cup-marked stone. So it's a Bronze Age piece of art that's been reinscribed, and it's still sitting in a rushy field just off the route to Thorek. The next station on that, and there's a whole series of different stations, is this side here, St. Patrick's Chair. But if you look closely at St. Patrick's Chair, this is Neolithic rock art. There's one little cross carved in it, and next to it is a children's burial ground within the remains of an early site, an early Christian site. Twice a year this phenomenon is observed from it, where you have a rolling sun, where the mountain of Croagh itself acts as this giant pyramid, and the sun stops or appears and rolls down the side. This has recently been published by director of Dunsink Observatory as one of these magical religious sites, and it may explain the presence of this rock art, the only one for 100 miles, and it's on the Tóthar. So this rock art has been used as evidence again for the antiquity of this pilgrimage journey. Now I used to believe it, but I'm becoming a little bit less skeptical, a little more skeptical, if you like. We're coming along here to, this is from Google Earth, you can actually see the main pilgrimage route now winding up the mountain itself from the north, from Murrisk Abbey, which is on the bay down here. There's another pilgrimage route from the south, from the east, and from the west. And these are all still in current use. So this is the view from the north, the pilgrimage route Tóthar coming along the top here. The main one now from the Murrisk Abbey, Augustinian down here, coming up here. And then Éine Crumdú, the Friday of Crumdú. That's the Friday before the last Sunday in July. There's a pilgrimage from the west up this route. And only the people from this area do it. So there's 3 or 4 different separate pilgrimages to it. The cross-section of that journey then is here. You've got the Lash Porrick, an early monastic site at the base, Murrisk medieval site, Tóthar, Lach Benon, a supporter of Patrick, Benon, Lach being an altar or shrine, and Cosson, the path of Patrick. So this is a modern station, it's not the ancient station, at the very base of the mountain. Often it's clouded in shroud. It continued, as many of these things, in a more low-key way throughout the 18th century, and then got revived massively in the late 19th century. So some pilgrimage sites was an attempt to suppress them. Others, because they were too more powerful, were absorbed and sort of reconfigured, if you like. This is the 1903 summit. And look at the style of people here. They're dressing up. This is the top of a very hard and steep mountain. And this is the earlier church. You have American money flowing into the church, of course, at this period. Population is plummeting. The amount of priests and religious is going through the roof in the other direction. So you have a whole new Catholic geography re-emerging in Ireland at this period. My first time on Croagh was on the last night pilgrimage as a teenager. And of course, as a 14-year-old, you suddenly got tremendously religious, clamouring to be let, please can I go on pilgrimage to Croagh. So the journey up, left the village I'm from at 12 o'clock when the pubs closed. It journeyed down, we picked various people on the way. So it was a whole concourse of teenagers out for the first time unescorted at night. How can you escort teenagers with 25,000 people around you? And then sort of 19 and 20-year-olds, sort of well fortified with all the inns along the way. And then more religious people, 30s and 40, quite pious, and 50s and 60s, and then more confident and fit, 60, 70, 80-year-olds all the way up. And so you have a whole of Irish life on these pilgrimages. And this is a night shot of the night pilgrimage. It was discontinued. And the people who still do today are fascinating. They're the Irish traveller community, reviled by most Irish people because they're misunderstood. They're a nomadic indigenous group, but are strongly attached to relics and holy water and shrines and rag bushes and all the saints of early Ireland. So they will still climb it. And this is a traveller woman on the summit here. They'd always climb it in their feet, as if their life isn't hard enough already. So I've never climbed it with my feet, for example. And this is loose rock and scree. So this is a serious penance. You climb from Murrisk up along this shoulder and right across, and then the very arduous last section. So literally thousands. It's like a giant anthill. But people say I don't like, I'm into. They don't want to go because they want to experience the spirituality of a mountain. Being alone, I find that very disturbing. when you're on this pilgrimage with thousands of people around you, then you can feel, you're actually drawn along by the whole feeling. And it's absolutely a wonderful experience. It would turn the strongest atheist, it would turn them. It certainly will challenge you in every sense, particularly if the day is bad and dangerous and wet. As one wag from Murrock said, Michael, he said, I know why the reason there was a night pilgrimage. I said, why is that? I never had a decent explanation why there was a night pilgrimage. Well, he said, Michael, if you've seen the height of it during the day, you'd never go up it. So the very... And on the way, you're still lacht ben on. Ben on is a figure from the life of Patrick from the 7th century, and you do the round on the loch. So these cairns, some of which are prehistoric or Bronze Age, others are more recent creations. You're circling as you go up. Others, when you summit the cone, you have to climb down the west side and do another site. This is Reliquira. So it may have been Mary gets referenced is sort of an overlay on probably another site. Because, of course, Bridget was the great Irish saint. Bridget got elbowed out later with the cult of Mary taking prominence in the Middle Ages onwards. But in the early church, she wasn't the most popular. So it took her a while to... So Bridget becomes the Irish Mary, and then Bridget gets elbowed out. So lots of sites are now relic. Wirra were probably had an earlier dedication to a different saint. The actual Cosson is here. This is the harder section up across to your summit monastery on the very top. And the level of gradient is formidable. And so on a night pilgrimage, it didn't make sense. If you were afraid of heights and you didn't see what's around, you are drawn together. You have no idea the steepness of the ground. So there was a lot of sense to the night pilgrimage because it kept people tightly packed together. And as you go up, you've passed Loch Ben, you're onto the summit, the last leg of the journey. And then you're coming up right across here into this summit. But on the summit, as you can see, there's a sort of large footprint type enclosure. A 1905 church built with American funds flowing into Ireland at that period. During the building of it, they found the remains of a grave and probably an early cemetery on top. When we surveyed, we looked at a series of aerial photographs, we found the remains because there was no actual known archaeology to this site. We had historical references to it, but there was nothing visible up there. Because some of these mountains, this one in particular, have a tradition of bringing relics home from it. People will take a stone of Patrick and they'll put it in their pocket and that'll be brought home as a relic of their journey to the top of the mountain. So over 1,500 years at least of pilgrims taking your stones off the mountain, it's degrading the top. Plus the gold was found on the western slope of it, $1 billion worth of gold at the time. And from the air in snow, we noticed the remains of a monastic enclosure, or what we thought was on the summit. We got an early 19th century account saying there was a cyclopean wall built on the summit of Patrick, built long before Patrick's time. I'm not quite sure how he knew that. But you do have Bronze Age hilltop enclosures from 1000 BC in Ireland, and this was probably one that was reused as an early monastic vallum in the early church. And people do the rounds off the actual, what was the old vallum, right around the summit. So the vallum is circular, and in the centre you have Laba Porrick, the bed of Patrick, and you have outdoor confession and indoor confession going on. So and this is this year. Archbishop Neary here, he's our patron, climbs it every year. And a general cross-section of rural Ireland. So it's really part of, and it's very part, the patrician link, if you like, is in northern half of Ireland. You rarely get people from Cork there, for example. So it's very much a Connacht Ulster tradition still. We excavated on the summit to try and see was there any context at all to the tradition, to the historical accounts, and so on. And we were able to confirm the reality of this was in fact an early monastery. So we excavated some of the huts that we'd spotted on aerial photography here. This is one of them pre-excavation. Some of the buildings we thought we could see, we were able to excavate also. And the rampart here, visible in this wonderful photograph from 1903, showing it as a substantial rampart and an internal ditch here. We just got the lower course of the rampart here. And the remains of an early church, a sunken church, right on the summit. The church would have looked like this. It's an upturned, boat-shaped, gallerus type oratory, a type of church which is very common in the southwest of Ireland and as far north as Clare. And they are said to be, well, we're not sure, I'm not 100% believing it, associated with pilgrimage sites in particular. This one is on Cosson na Niamh, the Saints' Road to Mount Brandon, this particular church site here. It's in Kerry. But on Croagh we got sort of this part of it, the bottom third of the site, sunken into the summit. So this pilgrimage tradition, again, I was lucky enough to be born into this culture, not knowing it was anything significant or anything unusual about it. It was just part of what we did. It's still continuing. There's a lot of research finally going on into it, and there's a wonderful new publication on Inishmurray Island by Jerry O'Sullivan and Tomás O'Carrigan, if you want to read up on more recent scholarship on Croagh and on the pilgrimage tradition in the West. But it's a vibrant, living cultural link with our Christian past, and arguably aspects of it are echoes of a pre-Christian ancestry to some of this tradition. Thank you very much.
Michael Gibbons for an extraordinary and rich lecture. Tyler, I'm wondering if we could get the lights up just a little so we're not quite so dark. And I was wondering if anyone would like to ask Michael Gibbons, anything about his lecture that it might have raised for you, any questions or comments?
Yes. I'd like to hear more about the growing skepticism that you referred to near the end of your talk. It wasn't quite clear what you're saying. You become more skeptical about the antiquity of the pilgrimage. What was it?
Well, the notion that we have this uninterrupted spiritual tradition, if you like, from Ireland has been settled for 10,000 years. First 4,000 years are hunter-gatherer, but from the Neolithic onwards, Ireland is full of people. And many of these sites, you can argue, that you can trace the antiquity of mountaintop pilgrimage in particular back to the Neolithic, because we have 70 mountains crowned with these tombs. However, there's one massive gap in our knowledge of the Irish landscape, and that's in the Roman period. We have no Romans in Ireland, so we don't have an actual Roman period. It's an Iron Age. So between the 1st century AD and the 3rd century AD, there's about as much artifacts that would fill a shoebox. So it's literally a dark age. And all our accounts, and our accounts with Crumdu and various other characters, are from the 7th and 8th century. And we have classical accounts, of course, predating this 2nd, 3rd century date. And so we've been trying to push these references through that 2-century gap and out the other end to provide this nice, neat, tie up all the loose ends. But there's a gaping hole in our knowledge there. And I'm a sort of old-fashioned archaeologist still. And that until we bridge that gap in terms of material culture, or where are the Irish in those centuries, we cannot find them. Some wag has speculated that they were in Britain working on Roman roads. As we know, the Irish are in Britain in the 4th century. But we cannot place them yet. So that's a sort of big question mark over this continuum all the way back. It's certainly there, though, from the 7th, 6th century. We can trace the tradition back, aspects of it, to that period. But whether we can go further back or not, certainly holy wells, for example, the veneration of wells is probably a pre-Christian tradition. But whether pilgrimage to them is a specific continuum of the earlier ones, we're not sure. So that's where I'm a little cautious rather than skeptical might be better.
In the back?
You mentioned the traveling community holding a lot of reverence for older traditions that might be lost by regular folks. Have you or is anybody building relationships or collecting oral history from that community?
Some has been done. The first and earliest study of them was done in the late 60s by 2 American anthropologists. Because these people weren't important enough for anyone serious scholars to be actually looking at them. So we've been very backward, and in University Limerick now there's some major studies being done on their culture and language, because they speak their own language, a mixture of medieval English and Irish. So they are custodians. They marry their first cousins, so they're a very tight-knit group, very kin-like, so very like the accounts, these disparaging accounts we have of the native Irish. And one of my old professors, Professor Michael, argued they were also famous as tinsmiths, so they had very specific function in a rural Irish society. That perhaps the great treasures of early Christian Ireland are in fact made by these high-status smiths, and that the travelling community are part of that culture that has continued right down. Now degraded and broken and not accommodated, but they were once a cultural elite, if you like, if a nomadic elite. We have accounts of them in the 12th century. So the traditional belief was these were people who were dispossessed with English colonization and later during the famine years. Now that is complete shafford. You don't become a nomad if you get evicted from your land. So you don't go on the road in that sense. But they are fascinating. So if you look at them, if you do come to Ireland, they're mobile heritage centres. They're custodians of aspects of Irish life that's old, but they're often in a quite a broken down and derelict state now. So it's been a sad history, really.
You mentioned that there's some phenomenon that happens around December 21st. Are there any rituals or pilgrimages associated with that?
Well, there's some recent ones. On the 18th of April and the 18th of August now, the St. Patrick's Chair, where the sun does set, to get a clear day, clear enough for the sun to set on Croagh Patrick on any day of the year is fairly miraculous. So you have a sort of people who are interested only in the pre-Christian aspects of Croagh Patrick. It drives me insane, because it's one story, and this may be part of it, but I'm not. If you move a kilometre either side, you can also see this particular event. We have no particular event. There are Newgranges orientated on the winter solstice, Neolithic site. We have many Bronze Age sites orientated on it, but no rituals associated with it.
You mentioned the children's burial ground. Are these adjacent or on the way? Do they become pilgrimage sites unto themselves, or are there any rituals?
Not unto themselves. They're often like where that beautiful slab I showed you with the Oran's figure, that's from a children's burial ground. So that burial ground was once a medieval church site within an early Christian church site on the road to Croagh Patrick. So this was consciously chosen as a burial ground because of the vernacular tradition of it being a sacred ground. So it's a cemetery that's no longer in use or an early church site. So the tradition, of course, was that the men bury the children there. The women were not part of that tradition. So they're often lined with white quartz pebbles. They're rarely studied and very rarely mentioned, but there are hundreds of them, or if not thousands of these sites. Kellerach, they're called in Munster, or Lishines.
Like you said, men buried the children?
Yeah.
These were unbaptized?
Unbaptized children.
In some cases, infanticide.
In fact, the other people buried on the children's burial ground are suicide victims and strangers. That would be you find dead on the hills or drowned on the shore, so you wouldn't know what religion to be. So they're sort of a spiritual no man's land for people on the edge of society, and they're very often on the edge of the world. They're on the edge of a boundary between two tribal townland boundaries, edge of the sea on the shore, edge of a bog. So they're in these sort of liminal zones. They're quite interesting where they're located. Maumane, that pilgrimage, for example, there's a wonderful children's burial ground just off the pilgrimage route. So it's sort of, if you knew it was there, it's just off it, but not quite on it. So they're conscious of it, but not really. So they're very, very interesting sites.
But often situated, you said, over monastic burials or near a church in an effort, to counteract the lack of baptism?
Yeah, because you have this traditional culture, religious culture. So in that culture, these children are still being honoured in a spiritual way. The earliest one I found was a Neolithic site in a beautiful portal dam in Glenamaddy, and it's been reused as a children's burial ground. So you're looking at, first of all, there's a 5,500-year-old prehistoric tomb, and surrounding it and you've got Iron Age barrows. They're rarely on their own. So there's rarely another association with them.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, but oftentimes in many pilgrimage sites, there's a lot of economic activity, buying and selling associated with many pilgrimage sites, and there didn't seem to be much in any of your pictures of kind of buying and selling activity. I was wondering if there's any historical evidence for it, or contemporary. I mean, a lot of these pilgrimages are on islands on the coast, so it's perhaps difficult to set up shop there.
I didn't mention, if I can go back, if I can flip, I might just get, oh yeah, there.
There.
And these are closely guarded and highly prized stalls, pilgrimage stalls. And they're owned by the farmers who own the mountain, because the summit of the mountain, the great step, which is the monastic vallum, the actual early church site is just there. You might just be able to pick it out. These stalls are owned by the landowners who live around it, and there's a whole, and it's handed down. So they will sell you all sorts of relics, holy water, tea. They bring it up, they come up by donkey the night before and set up all the stalls. So there is a very lively pilgrimage trade, and then there's a larger than normal number of hostelries at the base of the mountain, catering for the pilgrims as they come down, or those who have never actually reached the summit.
Is there any archaeological evidence of economic activity going back centuries?
That's a very good question. When we excavated, we got some amber beads from the Iron Age. We got a whole lot of tokens from the 18th and 19th century. But the mountain is a scree top, so it's very hard to get good context, and it's loose, so a lot of small artifacts in particular filter into the actual rock structure. We found it very hard to get credible context on the site, just in a few places. So in this case, very little in terms of hard, some pottery from 8th, 9th century, but nothing in the way of pilgrimage tokens. Though at Ardfort they found some. There has been a number of pilgrimage badges found, but not from this particular site, from a couple of other sites.
Could you repeat? I think you said there were 3 pilgrimages around Lughnasa, Mami, and what was the other one?
Well, you have Croagh itself on the last Sunday of July. Then on the Friday before that, you have Éine Crumdú, Éine meaning Jehina, the Friday of Crumdú. That's from the west of the Reek. Croagh is referred to as the Reek, a steeply stacked peak. And then Momain is on the 8th of August normally, or the first Sunday in August.
And do some people typically do off-season?
Some people, but generally not. But you would have some people who do it. Like Momain is a week removed, so you will have people who will come to Momain and haven't been to Croagh, and then go to Cahir Island, which is on the 15th of August. Whereas St. Macdar's Island is on the 16th of July. It's a little bit earlier on in the month, so you don't get so much of a crossover there.
When you mention people who own these mountains, are there people who are sort of served like in a long-term, like custodian role, looking after it?
No. And it's a major source of controversy because some people want and including mountaineering societies and all these sort of people, because people do die on them, people do fall off and get killed, and so there's a lot of people who want to try and have the authority to stop the pilgrimage if the day is bad, which I'm completely opposed to, because it's very often bad and it's very often dangerous. But that's the whole point of it. If it was easy, it wouldn't be a penitential journey. So, and this is a major, with all this health and safety regulations, which is a scourge on the world, it's particularly damaging. How do you assess a pilgrimage in terms of health and safety legislation when people are climbing it in their bare feet, which is patently difficult? And so these are clashes we have. As it is now, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So I'm personally terrified of either the state in the form of Department of Antiquities or anybody else in terms of council or health and getting their hands near it. It's a bit anarchic at the moment, and it's wonderful. So I can't imagine it being improved by any interventions.
Hi.
You mentioned at one point a secret floating island, and I was curious to hear more about that.
Well, it's
The floating island, but I think,
why it had to be on a map.
what is it?
High Brazil. The reason it had to be on a map is because it was so. It comes up in the Brendan Voyage. You have this tradition of sacred journeys by sea, sea journeys off into distant lands, and High Brazil is one of these spectral islands. Inishbofine is another one of them, the island of the white cow, but that was fixed in place and time when fishermen had landed on the island and confronted a woman driving her white cow out of the lake and touched her, and they were turned to stone, and the island was fixed in space. So there's a whole tradition of spectral isles in Irish folklore. And in High Brazil is one that drifted off. And in the oral history it's regularly seen in the Aran Islanders. Now there's loads of accounts on the Connemara and Aran and Kerry coast of people actually seeing it. And so numerous were these accounts that in the medieval period you couldn't sell a map if you didn't have it on it. But it moves around the map. So it's in the southwest this year, it's up here. Well, we're not sure what the origins of these myths. We have the land of youth, Tirnanog, of course, as well. And the Inishkay Islands, which are again a fabulous series of monastic islands just northwest of Croagh. Is it referring specifically to those islands where people, it's the land of youth, who live there. Children of Lyra spent 300 years on these islands.
Michael, when you were speaking about, and I loved your comments about ordeal, that if you legislate away the danger, then you've actually robbed the pilgrimage of its spiritual value if you try to protect the pilgrims. So I was thinking about the climb, and it seems that the heart of it is penance, that it's penitential, as you said. It's an ordeal. But then you mentioned the traveler woman who died, and you said that she had climbed 3 times for the healing of a very ill knee. So is that related to the idea of penance, or is it a separate function?
Well, it's a separate function because often, if you go to, it's particularly associated with holy wells, of course, which are all invariably associated with curative properties. But she was offering up her journey and her arduous journey so that Patrick would intercede on her behalf. Attention, yes.
Through her suffering.
To her suffering.
And was it believed through her death that he would intercede even more powerfully?
No. Okay. But I mean, the day she picked to go up was a particularly vicious, terrible day. Right. And that was deliberate.
She did it on purpose.
Yeah,
so
more value.
Yes, right.
Yeah, I'm curious, you were talking, wonderful lecture, thank you so much, at one point about the decline of the institutional church in Ireland while these pilgrimages are flourishing and so on. In the Roman Catholic community in Ireland, such as the Archbishop and seminaries and so on, is there a new theology developing about what it means to be Irish and Roman Catholic at the same time? Is there something creative going on intellectually about what's happening as the institute? No one goes to Mass on Sunday, but people do this.
No, I mean, our local Archbishop, Michael Neary, this is his diocese. So he's particularly interested in it. But I wouldn't say it's in any way, it's not central to being a Catholic. It's central to the Catholic tradition, if you like. So, people aren't encouraged at the village I'm from, for example, to go on pilgrimage to Croagh. People go independent of the church, if you like. So there isn't a great engagement in it, to be honest, which is a pity, because these are very interesting traditions, and it's unfortunate the pilgrimage tradition itself would not almost certainly be a subject of discussion or lectures during the teaching.
Because it just seems like it begs for some kind of theology, this kind of tradition that held the church together for centuries, the sacramentality of it, the holy places, the saints. It just seems like it's begging for something about rethinking what it means to be Catholic.
Well, the difficulty is, I suppose, the people doing it don't intellectualize it. It's a tradition. You don't really I mean, I grew up in this tradition. I didn't know there was anything strange or wonderful or different. It was just something we did. And, like most religious families, if you're born into it, you're just born into it. You often don't have a great understanding of it.
Well, and also the traditional church suppressed it very strongly, so it kind of was often at odds with it. I mean, the patronage of the archbishop is more modern.
Oh yeah, that's a modern. Yeah, I mean certainly in the 19th century, many of these were looked on. You had it. Yeah, and also it weakened. Even worse, it made you susceptible to conversion by a whole evangelical missionary movement, which was very active in this area. So they actually got attacked from both sides by resurgent Catholicism and evangelical Protestant missionaries who also looked aghast at these. Penal laws, for example, in the penal laws, the 18th century anti-Catholic laws which governed the 18th and late 17th to 18th century Ireland, pilgrimage was specifically mentioned and was banned because of the threat posed to civil authorities if people would take out the riot, not on each other but on the new administration. Sorry,
mountains that don't seem to have purely pre-Christian associations,
yeah.
They are still used for pilgrimages?
No, they're not. But I mean, you can argue in some cases that there was some aspect of pilgrimage to them because of just their sheer array. But there's no modern pilgrimage. If you think there's 70 mountains in Ireland where you can clearly see, if you're in the middle of Dublin, you look to the south, the mountains are crowned with Neolithic tombs. If you're in Killarney, Mangerton and Tomy's Mountain, there's Neolithic tombs. Galway City, the whole skyline is Neolithic. And right around Muckish Mountain, northwest Donegal, dominates the horizon, this massive Neolithic tomb. And so all your horizon in Ireland, the past is there. It's an everyday event. So, but only 7 of those 70 have a pilgrimage tradition, and only out of that 7, Slieve Donard is the only definitive one that we can definitely say, because the cells were inserted into the passage tomb. The chapel was in another passage tomb on the summit.
Before we close, I just want to ask a general question about a phenomenon that really came alive for me just from listening to you in Ireland. You showed us a slide of a holy well that was dug into a Neolithic tomb. You taught us about fairy rings, this notion of the fairies guarding ancient Bronze Age or other prehistoric sites. Was there a kind of, I don't quite know how to articulate this, but a response, a belief in these sites as, in a way, sacred, holy, or powerful? Would that be the right word? Why does this response go on, this reconsecration and appropriation of pre-Christian early monuments, would you say? Instead of trying to destroy them, for example, or cap them.
Well, the strong belief is that you went to, if you like, the belief in the spirit world is a mantle, a protective mantle across many monuments, right across the landscape, prehistoric, early historic. To interfere with the she is drawing the rat down on top of your head. So you spend your life avoiding them. One of my earliest memories, for example, was as a woman coming into my mother, Mrs. Conley, an old lady, and she's coming in. She said, "What sort of ignoramuses were those people?" Because they had built their house on a Cosson she, a fairy path. And this was a whole geography that she was aware of and conscious, and her whole world was conscious of that geography. And these were ignorant people because they were new to the area, they didn't know any difference. And her clear things that these people would never have a day's luck in their house. Like the cattle wouldn't have milk and so on. So that's a survival of. So if you like, Ireland has you have a Christian world and a Catholic world, if you like, but parallel and running across it, not often easily, you had a belief in a whole array of spirits and fairies, which are parallel to it. So people are very devout Catholics and were, but at the same time were quite happily believing in a whole array of Sheoge. The place was alive with Sheoge. One of the last big megalithic tombs I found, 40 metres long, Neolithic site, in Paul Uivin, the Hollow of the Grave was the name for it. And when I went to ask the nearest woman about it, the nearest small little farm, she said she'd never been up there. I said, why not? She said, 'tis alive with Sheogai. It's alive with spirits. And when I went up into it, it was a Neolithic tomb. Now, she didn't know it was a Neolithic tomb. But she knew there was a presence and an atmosphere. There was something about this place that was to be avoided. Not interfered with, certainly. And placated if you had to. So this tradition is there across many, many sites.
But attached to prehistoric monuments, that's what you said.
Well, it can be prehistoric, early historic. If you like, the spirit world hadn't got an ethnicity, if you like. And so it, like the Vikings, for example, became part of it. The Lochlani entered the spirit host as in the 10th century, as they became, as we saw them off, if you like. So they entered the world as another branch of the She. Having had a reality once.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of you for your questions and